Hey everyone, welcome back to this project series on the Explore Leathercraft Kit. Now, we're going to be walking through in this video and tackling this card holder. We're going to tool it and assemble it, but when you unpackage it, be sure to not lose your needle and thread. So we're going to set those aside and keep track of those. And when we look at this, we have 3 pieces of the actual card holder kit. So we have this big front piece and the same size, darker, kind of a little bit of a soft leather piece. Now you could just make this one and make that the back and call it good, but they do have this other smaller piece that we can put on here as another pocket as well. So we're gonna make this the back, and so I'm gonna take both of these parts and set these aside and concentrate on that big front. Because when we look in the book that comes with the Explore Leathercraft Kit, on this very last page, they have their design ideas for this project. Now, the kind of the geometric design here, that's tools we've talked about earlier in the series, using your cedar and your swivel knife, bevel around those edges. And I feel that if you've gone through our other projects in this series, that you're gonna have the abilities to do this tooling pattern here. I wanna do is in this video, we're gonna tackle a little more complicated one. Now they show on here an example where you can use just part of this pattern on the smaller piece of that wallet. And again, more welcome to do that, and you can have this tooled both sides. But we're gonna tackle this big pattern here where we're actually gonna use all of the tools included in this kit. So first things first, before I worry about transferring this, I'm gonna set that aside for a minute. We're gonna case this up, just meaning that we're getting our water content right in there, getting that moisture set down in the leather. So I'm gonna put enough on that it's going to take just a minute for it to absorb in the top. See, it's kind of sitting on there, taking a second to absorb. That tells me we're doing pretty good. So I'm going to set that aside, let that soak in there good, dry my work surface off. Now I'm going to bring this pattern back in place using our vellum, this tracing paper. You can see we've been using this throughout our other videos. We're going to place this over top of our pattern here. I'm going to trace around the outside edge to show where the edge of our wallet is. And then we're going to go through and trace our actual floral pattern here. Now, when I trace that floral pattern, we want to just stay right on our lines the best we can. We'll go over all of these lines. Now, one place to note is right down here on this flower center. We're gonna just kind of dot that line to remind us later on in our tooling, okay? And we'll come back and talk about that and why we did that. But for right now, we're gonna go along and get all these lines transferred onto our paper, so then we can take it over and put it onto leather. Now we can take our leather that's cased up, place that underneath our vellum or our transfer paper here, making sure we're lined up. We're going to simply transfer our lines, tracing back over them again with that pin, pushing down. And that's going to give us a guideline for when we start cutting this pattern in. Now to check, make sure we've got all our lines, I'm going to keep that pattern held down on one side. And I can lift my paper up and look for all of my lines and make sure that they're transferred. As long as I have that held down on one side, then it's going to lay right back down in place. It looks like we have them all transferred, so I can set that out of the way. Now we have great guideline to follow along and start using our swivel knife. Now, with your knife, make sure we keep that blade stropped so it's polished up and runs smoothly. If you need more tips on stropping that or how to tune this blade up and get it running smoothly, be sure to check out our video on using the tools in the Explore Leathercraft Kit, where we talk about that in more detail. But now, for our lines, we're going to start cutting these all in, except for that dotted line that we put in the center there. We want to leave that one alone. But we're going to keep that knife straight up and down. Follow around all of these lines that we put in here. After our lines are all cut in, the next step is going to be beveling. So remember, we have this flat side of our bevel and it angles down, so we want that bigger flat side towards us here, and that way it's going to push the shadowing out away from our line, so we can see this bevel in our line here. As we work our way around. Now, what side of the line do I bevel on? That's the biggest question for somebody starting out. The easiest way to do this here is, let's start by going around the outside edge of this. So anything that's on an outside border, we're going to bevel out away from our floral. So that's pushing the shadow out there. That means it's picking our floral up. But here, for example, once I start on this line in this direction, I'm going to stay beveling it in that direction all the way till it ends. Okay, so it actually came into my pattern a little bit, but it told me which side of the line to bevel on because it was an outside edge. Now on this edge, this line here it's coming underneath this and picks up right here. So it's on that same direction, right? Okay, we go back to our outside edge. Now this is an outside line. So that's going to follow all the way around here. But what about that little guy? That's still on that outside edge, right? But we have to stay on it all the way. It continues all the way in here. So that took us all the way into our pattern there. We'll keep going around our outside. Now, for the sake of the video, I'm going to show you half of this, because this half here is mirrored on this side, so we should be able to take the same thing we do here and put it onto this side here, right? So we'll continue down the outside edge of this one. We get in to looking at the flower here, right? It's an outside edge, so we'll all the way around. All right, now let's look at what our next lines are. There's a few of them that are in the inside of this pattern here, but to figure out what they are, let's look at it. So this is part of the flower. We'll just continue on the outside edge of that. But once we start on that line, we continue it, right? So now you can see that that's layering. It's putting this petal on top of this one. And now we get into this bottom petal here. This is like a petal that's folded back out towards us. But that one is on top of everything else here. So we can bevel out away from it. That stands it on top of everything. Okay, a few more lines in here. Let's look at what we're looking at. This piece that comes up here, comes around here, that makes this little spot background, right? So this is the edge of the vine. So I'm gonna turn around and we're gonna bevel towards that background area. Brings the edge of that vine up. When we come down to the bottom here, same thing. This is a vine coming out. That's a background area there, so we can bevel in towards that background area. Now this line here, we're going to look at that same background area, bevel towards that background area. Continue that line in the same direction we started on it. Look at this, that line's continuing all the way around here. It just tucks underneath that flower there. So we continue on to it all the way around. All right, now we're just down to one line left in here. So that one there is part of this vine. It's going to show some shadowing out there, and we're going to add some more detail tools to that. But we're going to bevel out away from that curve. All right, so we're going to continue beveling. I'm going to get these lines beveled. The whole time we're using our fundamentals that we talked about in our how to use these tools video to get those smooth bevel lines. So if you need a refresher on that, be sure to check back into that video so we're getting our nice smooth bevel lines and not any of the choppiness that you may be fighting yourself on as you're learning. So I'm going to get this beveled up, then we'll come back to our next tools. Let's move on to our pear shader. This is where we're going to start getting a little bit of depth put in here. We're going to come out to these outside pieces and get a little bit of shading right down those vines. Okay, we get a little bit on that outside. We can come over here to this little guy on the inside. I'm working my way back, fading that down here so it's not a hard tool mark, it's just a nice easy fade. Now on these little rounded parts here, put a little shading out there, a little bit in here as well. Okay, so let's move down that pattern, and we get down here to this vine. There's kind of two little ridges on this vine that kicks out. let's kick a little bit of shading in that one, a little bit there. So it starts adding a little bit of definition to those ridges as we run some shading down in those. Now, just on the inside edge here of this little swirl that's coming there, I'm going to throw a little bit of shading underneath here. Doesn't take much, but just a little bit. I'll mirror that over to this side as well. Okay. Right down here, that little vine sticking out the bottom. I'm going to put a little bit of shading on each side of that. It kind of creates a little ridge right in the middle of that. Now, we can mirror that same shading on these vines to this side here. And then we'll come in and start shading on our flower. You might see me rotating this pear shader around using different ends in different spots. And really that's just for whichever end fits better. There's a wider end and a narrow end, so as I come into this narrow vine, that narrow end is going to fit better there because I have that tool tipped, fading it around. Alright, now we can start working on the flower itself. You know, just as we were looking at these rounded ridges on those stumps, that's what that type of a vine's called. I can look at the rounded ridges in these flower petals here and start to fade some shading in each of those ridges. Now we start adding a whole lot more definition to those flower petals once we have some shading down in there. Now in all these ridges out here, I can run that shading down and just fade it down that petal a little ways towards that flower center. The next tool we'll look at is our seeder. That's that individual tool here. We're going to use that in two different spots. We'll use it right down here at the base, just as a single seed left in there. But now we're going to use it out along this flower center here. Now that dotted line that we had set up to start with, you can see we're going to bring that edge of that seed right to that dotted line. Now I'm going to move around here, putting those seeds right next to each other and stack them in. So we create that little half circle around there. Now it's a matter of filling in underneath there as we go along. So now I kind of created that little seed cluster in the center of that flower. Next tool I'm going to get out is our veiner. This is our longer, narrower tool. I'm going to start by running right up this outside edge of our stump here, I'm going to tilt this tool so the impression is right next to that line that's in the middle of that stump. And I'm going to rotate that tool so the impression is angled up towards this outside edge. We're going to start by fading in light. And then as we move up here, I'm hitting that tool a little bit more to see more of the impression of it. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, we're going to move down to the bottom, and looking at these two swirls, we're going to have the same idea, except for I'm going to tilt this tool out and work just on the outside of that swirl as we come around that edge. I'm going to tip that impression so it's pointing up towards the center of that swirl. Rotate that tool around as we go. Just puts a little extra texture on the outside of that particular vine. Now I'm going to reach in here and grab our camouflage. Now that's the little bit wider, narrower tool. That one and the veiner, people can get confused sometimes, but remember the veiner is longer and narrower. This one's a little bit shorter and wider. Now this tool here, we're going to start right in here on the inside of these swirls. See how that fits in there really nice? I'm going to tip that tool up and get just that edge in there right at the point of that line. See how that kind of starts fading around there. Do the same thing on this side here. All right, now let's look around the outside of this edge, the far outside, not just the swirl, but the outside of that vine there. I'm going to tip this tool a little bit out. And then I fade off as it comes around past that swirl there. And that's just getting, again, a little bit more texture on the outside of that particular vine. Okay. We're going to use the same tool right along that line that we used our veiner on in these stumps, except for I'm going to tip it and use it on the inside of that line just faintly. It's not going to take much. You can see that different texture that it adds in there. Our last stamping tool that we're going to look at is going to be our backgrounder. This tool here is going to put some texture and push down those backgrounds to really start giving a lot of difference in depth here in our pattern. So we talked about our different background areas when we were beveling, but we're going to see them now as we start pushing those down around our flower here. Final step to tooling this, we've got our backgrounds done, we've got all of our shading and beveling and veiners in there. Now we're going to do our decorative cuts. So we're going back to our swivel knife. Make sure we have that stropped up so it's polished and slides through there well. Now we're going to put these decorative cuts, these extra detail cuts that help add flow to the pattern here. So we're looking at where these vines are shooting out to the side. We're going to start our cuts deep. I'm going to fade them off light, and we're pulling those in the direction that we want the eye to see that things are flowing, right? Couple little tricks here. One, I'm not stopping them at the same spot. They stagger out there a little bit. That's going to help the look of those. Now, out here, I'm going to put a couple little cuts here. And then on the inside here, I'm going to pull some around that way so they fade down. Now, the pictures in the book, they show a lot of jagged cuts coming down there. Personally, I don't like the look of that, so I'm not going to add them in there. I think that gets to be a little much in these vines. But we are going to mirror this onto this side, put some of these decorative cuts over here, starting them deep, fading them light. Pulling back down the direction where things are flowing from. Same thing when we get down in these vines, we can follow some of those same rules. So put some cuts there, couple cuts on the end there, short one, a long one, a couple more down in that area. All right, now in these swirls, when we come back from there, I'm just going to pull one cut kind of right from this point, fade that around that corner. Just helps take up a little bit of that room, helps pull your eye around there as well. Now we have one more little vine down here we can pull some cuts into, and then the rest is in this flower. The big thing to remember on this flower is that our cuts are always going to pull back towards that flower center. We still want it showing some flow, right? So that's where these cuts are coming, and they're showing that flow. That petal's falling out from there. Okay, now we get into these other ridges that we have in here. Remember, really fading those cuts. The better we can do to fade those lines down there, the more depth we'll actually add with those cuts. Get up here into the bigger petal at the top. We're still pulling those down towards the center. Now that we have this all the way tooled up, that can set aside. We're going to pick that up with the finish and talk about that in our finish video when we put our color and stain on the rest of our projects from this series as well. But for this video, this is going to jump back into constructing this so you can show how to sew this together. Now for the construction portion, you can see that our tooled piece has been through our finish process here. You might have this other front piece tooled on yours and done up. I left this natural for one. You can see the difference in coloring on that. But we've all our pieces gathered. We have our thread and needle that came in the kit there. The only extra tool I have is a nice pair of scissors here. So we're gonna go ahead and use those scissors and get our needle and thread opened up here. First thing we're going to do is thread through that needle. Now, if you're careful, you can just keep that like that, but you do run the risk of that pulling out of there as you're sewing. So, trick I like to do is take that needle and we're going to push that right back up through our thread. Kind of split our thread with that needle, so our needle is actually running through the thread, and then pull that right back down on itself. So now it ties that needle on there. All right, in the book, it's going to talk about how we stack these pieces together. And simply enough, we're going to take the rough side of our tooled piece, the rough side of that extra piece, put those together. So you got a nice clean front and back there. And then we'll be stacking that last back pocket on there. Now, in the book, they say to run a piece of this string through and kind of tie that in a hole so they stay lined up. That's fine, you can definitely do that. I'm gonna just run this needle down in that corner so I know we're lined up, all of our holes are lined up. And then this is just a little binder clip I had sitting around on the desk. I'm gonna clip that together. Saves me grabbing another piece of string and tying together, and just eliminates that step a little bit for me. Now we're going to start in the middle here. So I'm going to come in between our layers, and we're going to, let's make it easy so we're all doing it the same. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 holes down. We're going to come from the middle out through the end here. Okay, so that's coming right out the front here, or the back, whichever way you want to look at this. And we're going to pull that around just to make sure we have plenty. We're going to leave a tail sticking out that end there, and that'll be something we're going to work with here in just a little bit. Remember, that's sticking, that little tail sticking out the edge of our leather. Now we're going to go down to the next hole, from the front to the back. We'll pull that all the way through. Now from the back, we're going to move up to the next hole and run it right through there. Once it comes back through to our original starting side, pull that all the way, and you can see that we're going to keep weaving our way back and forth here through. We just move down to the next hole, go through to the other side, come down to the next hole, back through. Keeping this pulled snug as we go through here. Doesn't have to be super tight and reef on that, but just keeping it pulled snug each time we go to the next hole. We're going to work our way all the way around here. Keep going around up to here. When I get up to here, we'll come back and talk about what we're going to do next. Now that we've made it to the end, we're going to go back down through those holes that we just stitched through. When we do, I want to stay always on the outside edge. So the edge closest out here, that side of the thread is where I'm going to put that needle on. We'll pull that through all the way. Now again, pulling that snug. So when I move down to that next hole, again, being consistent that we're staying on the same side of the thread. So I didn't come through on this side. I don't want to jump over on this side. We want to stay outside, closest to this edge. That's the way it's going to be easy to remember here. We'll stay close to that edge. And that's just not gonna, it's not going to affect really the way that stitch holds, but it's going to affect the way it looks. So I want to keep that nice, consistent pattern in there. Coming in on that side. Keeping that pulled snug. So now we're starting to lay that stitch in there so we have that full stitched look to it. All right, we're going to continue moving around here. I'm going to stitch all the way, not just back to where we started. We'll keep moving around back to where we started. We're going to continue up to this end, and then we'll stop there, turn back around just like we did here, and stitch our way back. But we'll touch base when we get there. Made it all the way up to this end. We just stitched right on past where we have that extra tail hanging out. And now we're moving our way back down towards that extra tail. Again, we're going to stay on the outside of that stitch, so closest to that edge, just like we did the rest of the way around that. Now we're back to where we had started at. I'm going to come just through that first layer here when we come into this last hole. We go into that first layer and pick right back up next to where that loose tail is. Pull that snug. So everything is a finished stitch all the way around, front and back, with two tails sticking out that seam right now. So I'm gonna get my scissors and just cut that other piece a little shorter here to manage. We're gonna pull those snug. I'm gonna come around twice, pull that knot down really good down into there. Do that one more time so we got a good tied off knot down in there. Pull those nice and snug. You see those are tucked down into that edge. Pull those straight up. We can trim those off. I'm going to take my needle and just help tuck those tails all the way down in that seam. So those wind up hiding down in there. So when we look at this, it's stitched all the way around and we don't even have any knots showing. I would consider this the biggest project in the Explore Leathercraft Kit. So I hope you're enjoying this and having fun with it. I invite you over to the video on color and finish. You can see how we put this nice finish on this project. And I appreciate you letting me be a part of your leathercraft journey. If you're enjoying this and want to do more of it, be sure to check out other videos on our channel here for lots of free content, and all the links in the description can lead you to more tools, products, and resources to continue on with your leathercraft journey. Take care.